have the most corrosion activity at the air-water interface. When you start looking at their effectiveness, toxicity, compatibility with the roll groove gaskets, the elastomers and those, there's a lot of issues. NFPA is moving away from it. California's already started saying you can't do this in a lot of jurisdictions because of toxicity issues. University of Texas Austin, we're doing a lot of work with them. Their own environmental groups telling them anytime they drain a system on campus that's been treated with chemical, they have to capture that water and pay for it to have it disposed of as a hazardous waste. So chemicals, they're just not effective, and there's other issues. So really the only thing you're left with is you just remove the thing that's causing the corrosion. In our case, it's the oxygen. We just remove the oxygen. We don't have to change the way we design systems. We don't have to change the way the materials that we're using in systems. We don't have to worry about disposing of water when we drain it. So we talked about chemical corrosion inhibitors, and I'm not really going to spend a lot of time on that because the industry's already moving away from it. It's just not an effective approach. If anyone wants to talk about it more later, we can be happy to. So nitrogen is where we ended up. So as a company, we said, well, what other options do we have? So we started looking at nitrogen. We started in dry systems. Nitrogen it's inert, doesn't react with anything. 78% of the air we breathe is already nitrogen, so it's abundant. It's green, there's no toxicity issues with it. So it was really a good fit for our industry. So if we talk about the wet system, once again, we're gonna separate wet and dry. Let's talk about the wet systems. What do we need to use nitrogen to enter a wet system? So let's think, the goal is we have an empty sprinkler system. We want to get all the oxygen out. How do we do it? We need a source of nitrogen. We need a way to get the nitrogen into the system. And then we need a vent to vent out that gas and to vent out that oxygen. Because a misconception is, I take an empty sprinkler system and I take a cylinder and I charge it with 99% nitrogen. The composite mixture of the gas in that system, say I fill it to 30 pounds, is going to be about 90, it's going to go from 78% nitrogen to about 92%. Excuse me. Well, everyone would say, well, we're at 92 instead of 78. Hey, we're good. Well, the problem is no, you're not good because you didn't vent any of the oxygen out. You still have the same amount of oxygen molecules in there. They just represent less of a percentage of the gas that's in the system. So it's very, very important to vent the oxygen out. You have to get the oxygen out. You can't just dilute it, because the oxygen molecule, if left in there, will react. So what does that look like on a system? Back at the riser, which is at the top right-hand corner of the screen here, we have our valve that we would normally have, our alarm check valve. We install a port, and that just allows us to hook up a source of nitrogen. A lot of times in a wet system, we're going to use a cylinder of nitrogen because we just need nitrogen up front. We don't need to keep nitrogen on the system. We don't need to recharge the system after a given amount of time. We just need to purge the pipe network before we fill it with water. And then we don't have to do anything with nitrogen until we drain the system again. So just from the economics of it, it makes sense to use cylinders unless you have a large warehouse or a lot of systems where it would be cost effective to install a nitrogen generator. Then what we do is we go to the opposite side of the system and we put a vent on the system. And this is how we're going to inject the nitrogen, we're going to pull it across the system, and we're going to get that oxygen out. This is what our vent looks like. And our vent is unique, it's actually patented. What it has, and the patent sits around the fact that it has 2 independent float valves in series on it. And what that does is it reduces your need to pipe anything to drain. There's 0 failure risk from water shooting out of this thing because it's redundant. It's a float valve that we've used in the industry for years. But this is what we use to get the oxygen out. And you'll note there's a little brass, you see a little gauge here, a little regulator, and some brass hanging down. That's a very important part. You can't just put a vent on the system because an air vent would just vent nitrogen as fast as you're putting it in. But we can't do that because when we do that, gas is like electricity, it's like water. It's going to look for the path of least resistance. If we didn't retain pressure and cycle the pressure in the system with nitrogen, we do a really good job of inerting the point where we're injecting the nitrogen to the point where we're have the vent that the oxygen's coming out, but we would do nothing to address any of the branch lines or any of the dead ends of the system. What this vent's designed to do is it's designed to hold pressure in the system. So when you're inerting the system, you're actually going to cycle nitrogen in and out of it. What that does is it mixes it mixes the nitrogen into the oxygen content, and then it pulls it back out. This is just what the nitrogen valve looks like. But this is the illustration of what we're actually doing when we're purging the pipe network. The purging process is very, very simple. It just consists of 3 cycles of filling the system to 30 psi with nitrogen and then letting it come out. So all we're doing is just pressure cycling. It's called sequential dilution, and the goal is to bring the oxygen content out of the system and get it to a point where it's sitting at 98% nitrogen at an atmosphere pressure. So we're moving it from 78% nitrogen in atmosphere to 98% nitrogen in atmosphere, and that's the whole process. That's all there is to it. We've been doing this for actually almost 5 years now. The first facility we ever did this was a satellite manufacturing facility. FM Global brought us in. They built satellites there for the government. They had a 1 million square foot facility, was having a leak every week. And if you can imagine this, they had about 25 satellites, and these things cost about $500 million a piece. Their system was leaking so bad that they literally had blue tarps from Home Depot strung up over these satellites, protecting them from the sprinkler system. That's how bad their problem had gotten. So they called us in. We told them we've been doing dry systems for a very long time, and that we could look at the solution for the wet systems using the same principles. Initially, they told us no. The fire marshal did. He said he didn't want to be a guinea pig. But we said, no, we understand your reluctance, but why don't you go talk to some of your other heads of maybe some of your research departments, some of your guys that have PhDs in corrosion specifically, and see what they have to say about it. Well, they came back and said, yeah, this will be acceptable. We did it for them. We didn't replace any pipe. No pipe replacement at all. And we inerted all 25 systems. They went for 4.5 years without having a leak. They had a leak about 6 months ago. And we said, well, what'd you do different? They said, we didn't do anything different. We said, you did something different. You don't go for 4.5 years with no leaks and then have a leak happen. Well, what they did was they replaced a flow switch. They had some of their maintenance guys replace a flow switch. They didn't follow the protocol for draining the system down and keeping it inert. That one drain and fill introduced enough oxygen for them to have another leak. What happened was they called the contractor out to inert the system again. And they've gone another 6 months without having a leak. So the process is very, very effective. I'm not going to say every single system can be saved without any pipe replacement, but we do have great success sometimes in eliminating leaks without any pipe replacement. So it's simple, it's straightforward. It relies on the pressure cycling process to exchange the gas, and like I said, it's proven technology. Let's switch to dry pipe inerting. We covered wet pipe. Wet pipe's fairly simple. Dry pipe, so same science, a little bit different application. And we still have the same things. We still need the nitrogen. We still need a way to get it into the system, and we still need a venting device because we have to get the oxygen out of the system. But what we're going to do is, because we have to have a compressed gas source, supervisory gas source on the system at all times, we have to have nitrogen there at all times, because we can't inert the system and then start putting compressed air in from an air compressor. That just negates everything we just did. So we want to have an on-site nitrogen source. So we want a nitrogen generator there hooked up to the system so that it will keep the oxygen purged out of the system. We could build a nitrogen generator that would meet the 30-minute fill requirement for whatever size system you have. But with anything else, the larger you go, the more expensive it is. The nitrogen generation process is about 50% efficient. So if I have a 2 horsepower compressor and I'm putting out 18 standard cubic feet a minute of compressed air, I'm only going to get about 9 standard cubic feet a minute of 98% nitrogen out of it. So effectively, to meet the 30-minute fill requirement, we'd have to build your nitrogen generator twice as big. So in order to be conscious of cost, we came up with a process about 8 years ago where we have a bypass on the generator. So you can fill your system with compressed air. We can meet the 30-minute fill requirement. Once we get the system set, the valve set, the system's live, we switch the valve configuration over on the nitrogen generator, we start putting nitrogen in. What we're going to do, and what's illustrated here on this slide, is we're going to cycle somewhere above your low air alarm, but below a higher air alarm if you have one. We're going to pick a range of about 3 to 5 pounds. We're going to put nitrogen in, and we're going to let it come out. We're going to put nitrogen in it and let it come out. It's the same thing we were doing with wet systems, except we're doing it at a much lower pressure range. So it takes a little bit longer. But we still need to have the oxygen out as quick as possible. We started developing this protocol actually with the Navy, and they said, well, if you're going to develop something, you have to have a standard. So we just kind of came up with a good rule of thumb of we want to be at 98% nitrogen in the system after 14 days. Now, if you talk to anyone that sells a nitrogen generator for the fire protection industry now, they're going to tell you 14 days, 98%. You can ask them where it came from, they'll have no idea. I can tell you it came from us, we were working with the Navy. But ideally, what's going to happen at the end of the 14 days, if not before, we're going to be at 98% nitrogen throughout the entire system. Then the generator is just going to come on and act as if act like an air compressor and just keep that supervisory nitrogen pressure where it needs to be. This is what it looks like. Every option except for ours out there for doing this technology is going to tell you need to put a vent, and it's kind of hard to see. It's very top of the screen here. It's going to tell you need to put a vent at the very end of the system because they do what's called continuous venting. We talked about continuous venting a few slides ago and why it's not a good idea because it will, over time, cause corrosion issues. Because we use the pressure cycling method, it allows us, so here, let me show you this. So if I just kept a continuous pressure in my fire sprinkler system and I'm just putting nitrogen into my system and then letting it vent out, trying to push the oxygen out, I'm going to do a really good job of inserting this main piece of pipe where those arrows are. I'm not going to enter anything where the branch lines are because there's no reason for the gas to go down that way. So what our process does is we use the pressure cycling. Here we go. We use pressure cycling, which was that graph we were just looking at. But if you'll notice, our vent is now down at the riser where those arrows the squiggly arrows are coming out. Because we use the pressure cycling method where we push air into the system and then we pull air out of the system, we can put the vent anywhere. I could put the vent at the end of the main, I could put the vent at the end of the branch line, but I can put it anywhere because the gas is always going to come back out to wherever that vent is when we do our pressure cycling. This is just a little illustration of what's actually happening. But the reason we do that is because now every piece of equipment is at the riser. It's easier to install, it's easier to service, and if you're operating something like a data center, it's not a point of failure that's out over your computers. It's not a point where when Eagle comes in to service the system, they say, well, I got to go on the data floor and work on this. You don't have to go on the data floor. All of their work will be contained to the fire sprinkler valve.
So when you draw it out of the system, you use a vacuum or you just allow it to flow out?
When we pull the gas out of the system, we just allow it to flow out because what's happened is this system's always going to be higher pressure than atmosphere. So we just open a valve, we give it an opportunity to go to atmospheric pressure, and so it just naturally will come out because we have a positive pressure in the system, and then we have a lower pressure in the atmosphere.
Yeah, just wonder because in refrigeration we draw a vacuum.
That's a good question. I get that a lot. We looked at drawing vacuums. We found we didn't get much of a benefit from it because one thing that happens is you draw too much of the vacuum, you suck oxygen back in through your roll roof fittings. And so you're pulling oxygen back in. So we found just using positive pressure was a better application than using negative pressure. But yeah, I do get asked that. So eventually, over our cycling period, we're going to get all the oxygen out and have a nitrogen-rich environment. This graph is a test we did in our laboratory, and what it's showing you, the green line is pressure cycle venting, so that's what we just talked about. So this represents on the left-hand side here of your graph, you have oxygen percentage. Along the bottom, you have time in days. What this is showing you is after about 12 days, we were at 2% oxygen. So we hit our mark. We got the oxygen out quickly before I had time to react with the system. The red line is the fixed pressure venting, which is the vent out on the end of the system. We keep a constant pressure in the system, and we don't do any pressure cycling. We do the green line. All the other offerings that are out there on the market do what the red line represents. And so once again, this is real data from a test in our lab. And what happens is, if you run out there to 90 days, which is about the end of that red line, you run over here and look, you're at about 7% oxygen. So you're nowhere near the 2% oxygen. And this is a test where we measured this oxygen level was at the end of a branch line. So we didn't measure it at the vent coming out because we already knew we were going to have a low oxygen concentration there. We measured it at a dead end in the system because we wanted to know and prove that we were mixing the gas and all the system was homogenized at the same oxygen level. So part of the reason this actual red line dips like that is because the oxygen is reacting with the pipe wall. Some of it's coming out the vent, but some of it's going out reacting with the pipe wall. It's just the same setup. So we have a nitrogen generator, an air compressor, and a vent. That piece that you see up at the top on the main there, that's one of our monitoring devices. Monitors for corrosion. We'll look at that here quickly. This is just what a nitrogen generator looks like. It's a big filter. That's all it is. Just filters compressed air and filters the oxygen out of it. Venting options. You can have manual vents or automatic vents. The difference is manual vent, someone has to open it when the valve's set. Someone has to come back after 14 days and close it. The automatic vent, you set it when you set the valve, and no one has to come back and close it. No human intervention there. We've been doing dry pipe is where we started. We've been doing it. We brought it to the industry. We have a longer track record with our method than anyone else out there. It's easy, efficient. We always are looking for ways to make it less expensive, easier to operate, and more reliable. So we're continuously improving the offering.
You talking about filling the tanks and using it on the wet system. Can you use this generator to fill your own tanks?
You can. So this is a low pressure generator. The question was, can you use this generator to fill nitrogen cylinders? This is a low pressure generator. The maximum output nitrogen pressure you're going to get is around 100 pounds. Cylinders are around 2,800 pounds. You'd have to get a booster pump. It's very expensive. You've got a lot of safety issues when you start doing things like that. Theoretically, yes, you could do it if you had enough money to put in the infrastructure. But you could buy a lot of nitrogen cylinders with the amount of money you have to do that. Yeah. The very last thing we're going to touch on here is how do we monitor corrosion in our industry? One way is, I was told one time in the presentations, we look at the ceiling tile and wait for the orange spot to show up. So not a good way, right? There are different coupon methods out there right now. We sell a coupon method. It's kind of our first generation technology. We came up with a better way. And what that is we've taken a piece of pipe and we match your whatever piece of pipe to go into a main in a dry system or a branch line in a wet system. We take that piece of pipe, match the diameter, we take it and we mill it down. So that upper right-hand picture, from the outside of the pipe, we take it down to 35 thousandths of an inch. You look at the inside of the pipe, you don't see anything different than your sprinkler pipe. From the outside, it's cut down to 35 thousandths of an inch. We weld a piece of pipe over that. It forms a little interstitial space there. That space, we then drill and tap it. We put a pressure switch on it. When enough corrosion has taken place to get through that 35 thousandths of an inch, the system pressure goes into that angular space, activates the pressure switch. We know we have corrosion. We know something's going on with the system. This is extremely accurate and responsive. We had a data center out here on the East Coast. They put 39 of these in, one on every system. They were hydroing the systems. They had them on compressed air. Before the nitrogen went on, they had them on compressed air for about 8 weeks. We had 2 of them go off in 8 weeks. Once we put the nitrogen on the system, we haven't had one go off in 2 years. So they do exactly what you want them to do. They want you to tell you have a problem before you have a leak, before you have to replace the pipe. This is just some code references. No one here deals with the UFC. That's the government standard for buildings, DoD standards. NFPA 13, we talked about this, corrosion inhibitors are going away because they're not listed as compatible with the gaskets. This is kind of important. When we looked at the pictures of the galvanized pipe versus the interior of the black steel pipe, we saw the roughness of those two comparable. You used to get a hydraulic advantage for using galvanized pipe. NFPA 13 has now removed that because they've seen the interior pipe after a given amount of time is actually rougher than the black steel equivalent. So you no longer get a hydraulic advantage for using galvanized pipe. So when you walk out of here today, just things that I'd like you to take with you is oxygen is your problem, Nick isn't. Oxygen corrosion is cumulative. So unless we address the oxygen getting into the system, we're always going to have corrosion problems. And when we use nitrogen, it's still important to get the oxygen out quickly. And it's important to get the oxygen out of the entire system and not just from point A to point B or from the injection point to the vent. So the pressure cycling is very important. So And then an effective means of corrosion monitoring should be employed. You need to know that what you're doing is being operated effectively. It's basically performing what you're paying for. So anyway, thank you very much for your time. I know that's kind of long. Hopefully it was informative. And any questions, we can eat lunch, and we're happy to answer them.
So thank you, Adam. For right now, we're gonna bring in lunch. So we'll go ahead and pass that out to y'all. If y'all have any questions for Adam, feel free to start asking. Same in Charlotte and Charleston. If y'all have any questions, we can see you now. So just go ahead and shout them out. And then we're gonna go ahead and pass the surveys around as well. So thank you again, Adam. So if anyone has questions, go right ahead.
Adam, you mentioned earlier the back of is that just not ever been a pursuit to try to being the culprit of this corrosion?
Right. So not for corrosion. Now we do use vacuums on systems. Like there's a product out there called Drop Master, Drop Vac.
Yeah.
What they use that for a lot of times is if we're working in a finished environment, we can put that on the system. We can pull a vacuum on the system. So when they're pulling out a head or a drop, the water gets sucked back out and doesn't drop into the finished space you're working in. But from a corrosion control standpoint, no, it's never been an option. It's a draw oxygen out of the system.
So the supervisory has always been a positive pressure versus the vacuum.
Yeah, so as far as supervisory pressure goes, absolutely, yes. So that allows us to ensure that the pipe integrity is still there. That's why we have